Many of us will remember Princess Diana, who married Prince Charles of England in that storybook wedding that the whole world watched on television. A couple years after their wedding, Charles and Diana were visiting Australia. Princess Diana wanted to speak with some of the regular people out on the street. Seeing a group of little children, she went over to them. She patted a little boy on the head, and as she played with his hair, she asked, "How is it, young man, that you are not in school today?" The little boy said, "I was in school, but they sent me home because I have lice in my hair." Here was a princess who was used to dealing with very important people, used to dealing with her mother-in-law, the Queen of England, used to dealing with heads of state and all sorts of grand people, and yet she didn't think it was beneath her dignity to go up to a little child and talk to him, treating the child as her equal. There is something very Jesus-like in this. A little before the time of Diana, there was another famous Englishman, the Duke of Wellington. He was the great military leader of the 19th century who defeated Napoleon. One day, this famous Duke was riding his horse, and on the side of the road he saw a little boy crying his eyes out. The Duke stopped, got down off his horse, and asked the little child, "What's the matter, my friend? That's no way for a little gentleman to behave. What's wrong?" The little boy said, "Tomorrow I have to go away to school, and I'm very worried about my pet toad, because there's nobody to take care of him, and I won't know how he's doing." The Duke smiled, and he assured the little boy that he would take these important matters into his own hands. And the Duke took the toad from the little boy to look after it himself. A week later, the child received an official-looking letter at his boarding school. The letter said, "Field Marshal the Duke of Wellington presents his compliments to Master So-and-so and has the privilege of assuring him that his toad is doing just fine." Here, too, was a person who was quite used to dealing with important people, the people we tend to think of as the first of this world. He himself was one of those first, yet he did not consider it beneath his dignity to come down off his horse to speak with this little child, and indeed to assist this little child in a touching way. Once again, there is something very Jesus-like in that. In the Gospel, we hear something very familiar. Christ often found himself dealing with the great of this world. He didn't always like them much, but he was in their company, and they were interested in him. He much preferred the society of the poor and simple people, and the great sinners, and yes, of the children. The greatest of all took into his arms a little child. When I was in Africa, I met all kinds of truly great people. People who in the eyes of the world would be considered the first, the leaders, the greatest. I dined with the governor at her home and was often dealing with the chiefs of tribes. Yet the greatest experience I had of interaction between two human souls was with a 3-year-old child. I walked into a home one day, and as usual, there were dozens of little children there. Most of them, when they saw me, screamed, and I suppose that's the normal reaction of children when they see a stranger. But one little 3-year-old boy looked up at me immediately with something I can only describe as a look of recognition. He saw in me a kindred soul. He nodded seriously, and without any fear or hesitation ran up to me, threw his arms around me, and insisted that I pick him up. For the next 4 days he would not leave me. It was as though he had known me from a different life. It was the strangest thing, and I am told he never does that with anyone else. That bond we had between us was like nothing I had ever known, so I began to call him my grandson. Children are very interesting people, and it is no wonder that Jesus looked to children as the ideal human beings. It is no wonder that the Christ was able to throw his arms around a little child, pick him up, and hold him up as an example to his disciples. They had been fighting about who was going to be number one. I want to be first. No, I want to be first. And he said, wait a minute. If you want to be first, be last. If you want to be greatest, be the servant of everybody. And if you want to be truly great, then pick up one of these little children, and that will show greatness of heart. Now, I myself did not follow those instructions. I did not go up to this child and receive him. No, the child came to me and received me. Isn't that the way it happens so often in life? Sometimes it's not we who go out and seek God, but time after time, God comes and seeks out us. God does that sometimes in the form of seemingly insignificant events, sometimes in the form of seemingly insignificant people, even someone as insignificant as a little child. Should we be surprised that God seeks us out in the form of a little child? That's exactly what happened that first Christmas day 2,000 years ago. We did not approach the little child. The little child came to us. God came to us in the form of a child. Do you want to be great? Look for greatness in the little things of life. Look for greatness in the so-called little people in life. Look for greatness in the simple. Look for greatness in the smallness of life. God can come to us in so many ways. Most often, God comes to us in those insignificant moments of our life, in those so-called insignificant people of our life. And sometimes God comes to us as a little child.